little aircraft that got, you know, videotaped by some people. Um, the reason I sent you that is because if you've ever heard of a guy named Joel Scalzon that wrote a book, Strategic Relocation, he talks in there about, I'm going to say it's his theory, but according to him, he knows this from being an insider. But anyway, he talks about this plan that there's a planned nuclear exchange between the United States and China. Now, this isn't me saying this is something that's in this book, and he's talked about it. But anyway, that there would be a planned limited nuclear exchange to bring about the final, key to a one world government, a communist, capitalist style top down dictatorship. And you've heard many of these elites talk about China is the goal model of this one world government. But all of a sudden now they're not getting along with different stuff. And you're saying China's agreeing on some other stuff. There may be some infighting, but I know that even China and the elites all agree on one thing, and that overpopulation is an issue that they want to tackle. Whether or not it's a real dangerous issue to the world or not, that's another story, but they do want to reduce the number of people on the planet. So it makes you wonder if this idea from Joel Scalzon, which is basically that the United States and China would exchange a couple of nukes, and then there would be some kind of new peace order. And then the United States would come out with its next level technology that it's been building for quite some time, making China the destroyable enemy. And the reason I kind of say that is because, in the past, we know from history that the United States gave a bunch of gold and weapons to Mao and helped him, do the communist revolution. And, Uncle Stalin, there we helped all of that go down um, in Russia as well. They used to joke about that, but we actually helped build the communist counterpart to the capitalist empire, so that there would always be two sides of this, and that they could always have little proxy wars amongst the smaller nations. But the end goal eventually always was between the League of Nations in World War One, the United Nations in World War II, to the ultimate goal of a one world communist dictatorship. And that's exactly where we're at. And that's why they're shutting down everything. Now, I don't know if they're going to go with the war with China, but it kind of seems like we've been building to that for decades. If you just believed that the geopolitical environment is really unfolding how the mainstream media says it is, or if you believe it's a more orchestrated event like I do, that it's a inevitable end that will involve the Middle East. It will involve all of these factions that you always hear about, Israel, Iran, and then they'll have some Russian fighting amongst the Slavic nations in the breakaway belt. And then also Taiwan, Taiwan. I meant China and Taiwan will finally have their little epic settling of whose land that is, whether or not it's the renegade state of China or it's the sovereign nation of Taiwan. But I think all of this is about to come to a head all within our lifetime. And it's just going to be announced on the news out of nowhere. And it'll be at the peak of all of the authoritarian lockdowns, and right about the same time that they tell the public in different places that they're going to have to start rationing and limiting their movement. And I see all these signs just right in the headlines. It's all over the place that the Biden administration is about to propose a new bill that would require your negative test or a medical procedure, if you want to call it that, and able to fly domestically just within the United States. So you can imagine where this is going to go internationally, just like we've been talking about throughout the last year.
No, I do not acquiesce. And I encourage everybody else to say no. Do not spend your money with any company and any firm, and change your habits. If you need to fly domestically, do not. Rent a car and drive. If you must do something for business, claim an exemption. That's something, and the airline makes you frightful and you have to drive. Take the money out of these companies. Just say no. If we all stopped wearing the masks and said no, this silliness would end tomorrow. We gave up all these rights in a flash, literally a fifth of an eighth of a second of centuries of trying to scrape, scrap, and claw back everything that these elitist powers that had acquired through, I don't know, let's go back to the 1200s, if you will. The Knights Templars. From that period forward, every single eighth of an inch moving forward for our sovereignty as a human, God-given rights to exist on this planet from the Creator, not from government, not from church, was given up in a fraction of a second because people were scared. Stop saying yes, start saying no. When this happens en masse, then what can government do? Nothing. They should be terrified that the citizens have the numbers. And this whole thing about the social credit score, since I lived and worked in China for a little while, at the tapering in of this system, at the beginning it was called Sesame Credit. That was the very first days of this, what you consider the draconian social credit score that limits you from jobs, apartment rentals, high-speed rail, or anything, even flights. In the beginning, it was called Sesame Credit because they wanted people to play with it, and they gave it away. And they had a select bunch of cadre hardcores that were like, yeah, you got to play with me. Yeah, I'll be your friend. Okay, let's play this. It was fun. China is seeing how far they see. China's the test bed there because you got to realize that what's going on in China for the last 10 years with the social credit score. Nobody had ever heard of this really in earnest until now. This last 2 years, you've really heard of social credit. But before that, yeah, maybe it's like a rumor here, maybe a story over there. What kind of broke it was when people would cross the crosswalks, those big signboards, within the time that you had broken the law walking across the crosswalk, by the time you arrived to the other side of the street, they had your ID, they had your picture, they had your name, your residence, and everything on the billboard with the facial recognition going that fast in a city to publicly shame you by the time you made it across the street. That was kind of it. We're like, whoa, that AI is incredible fast. And you might say, well, yeah, they could catalog everybody, those few million citizens living in the city, so they could knock it down instead of being 1.6 billion people, whatever, they could knock it down to a few million because it's only those people living in the city, so they have everybody's ID and registration card for the city, and yeah, they could shame them on the city block. Okay. But the whole purpose of it was, like you're going to see now, how much pushing did it take to have the citizens comply? And to keep them in order where they never talk, never get out of line ever again. See, the things that were taken for granted as everybody could buy a train ticket, that's how you got home for Chinese New Year. Nobody drove. You took the train. You flew if you're incredibly rich enough to get a flight and find a little seat in there, but very few people were flying. We're talking like, let's even go back 15 years ago. Everybody's traveling by train. High-speed rail, that's a new thing in the last, say, 10, 15 years. It was taken for granted. You could just get a high-speed rail ticket, cut your journey time, nearly the speed of flight. A first-class ticket on a regular speed train, or now you're relegated if you have bad social credit, you have to take the mail train with something that would take you 4 to 5 hours to get back to your hometown in China. If you're taking a regular train at regular speed, 4 hours. But then if you have bad social credit, you have to get on the mail train, which would take you 16 or 24 hours. And you couldn't, see, they don't let you buy bus tickets either. So they force you into the slow route. And the whole social experiment in China was, what was the carrot on the stick? What was the punishment if you did not comply? And the algorithm has been worked out so fine-tunedly, if that's even a word, that they know exactly what it will take to push everybody into compliance. and they know exactly what it'll take and what they need to remove from your life to get you to comply. And that will be for 97% of the population. The problem is there's these 3% of people who just will say no, or even 4%, probably even higher. It's 3% in China. It's going to be higher in the Western countries. But the terrifying thing for the elite is American Revolution was won with 4% support and participation. There's going to be a higher rate of non-participants in the social credit system in the Western countries than there would be in China at 3%. So when we don't comply and we have the numbers to say, no, I'm not going to fly anymore. These airlines are struggling anyway to stay in business. If everybody says, no, we're not going to fly, we're going to drive instead. Take the money away. Vote with your dollars. Companies are struggling anyway. Put them out of business. Take off your masks. Don't say no. No job, no whatever, no medicine, no job. Okay, I'm going to go off and do my own thing. It could be a freedom and liberating. I don't know what I can really say on the show tonight because that Ransom, I know you're broadcasting live, so I'm going to kind of bite my tongue on that.
No, you're good. You say what you want. I'm done with the censorship. I'll have 20,000 channels if I want to. They will not stop people from saying things that are true things. I mean, how can you? You can't stop the truth. You can try to hide it as much as you want, but it always comes out. So I feel like, if I have to edit certain topics out, that's fine. But we talk in code, so I think it's good enough. And it's really only the one topic that they don't want anybody to talk about. I mean, they're slowly getting rid of other stuff, but this is the one that they're trying to draw the line on. This one topic you can't talk about, or you get deleted off of everything. And once they get away with that, then they can do it about every topic.
There'll be nobody left to complain because everybody who got that special medicine will be gone in a couple of years. And so you're not supposed to talk about that either, especially this approaching winter, and why they're going to be using all these plastic boxes that can house 7 inhabitants in there that could be then incinerated. Oh no. You remember down in Atlanta, going down to Atlanta on 75, if you went off, Georgia Guidestones are one thing. If you're going to Atlanta on 75, you need to go east, and you come out to the Georgia Guidestones, about 2.5 hours through chicken raising country out there, and you come out to this little tiny knoll on the hill in a granite mining town, and you're out at the Georgia Guidestones. But unbeknownst to a lot of people, there's a few vids that were back in the day going down 75, even in some small towns just miles from 75, there were thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of these plastic stackable, would look like incineratable boxes where you could put probably like 7 pieces of logwood in there, for a better term. See, this is why do they have so many disposable devices and holding storage boxes for all the dead? If they didn't see, somebody knew in advance. This whole thing has been planned for ages, absolutely ages. And all these things are starting to fall into place now. There's no more conspiracy theories left. They've all been proven correct. And everything you hear that might even sound iffy right now as a possibility seems more likely than not. Something nefarious is going on. And the way I look at food, I'm pretty much a science-based guy, looking at how the sun controls climate, looking at the climatic records, digging back into peer-reviewed research to try to prove my point on a scientific basis. For those who want to argue CO2 drives climate compared to sun and the historical cycles of a rise and falls of civilization. That's easy compared to what we're dealing with right now with this whole, I don't even know how to even describe it in words, what we're witnessing right here, a depopulation event. And again, you might say, well, that's a little wacko to talk about. You're a little outlandish, Dave. No, I think I'm being a little way too conservative because everybody who got this medicine is going to be gone. So it comes back to the whole thing. Don't comply. But I mean, who's going to be left to fly planes? They're already trying to ground pilots who had medicine. Is anybody going to be left to even run these companies? I mean, at what point does the government, like the world elite, have already decided everything's at a fire sale? Even if you say no, it doesn't matter because the companies are going out of business anyway. They're going to reduce everything down 90% anyway. It doesn't even matter. Just let it take its organic crumbling course into a dissolved kind of ethereal wafting foggy state over there. It doesn't matter. Just let it run its course, make as much damage on the way out as it can. I don't know that, understanding the grand solar minimum cycles of population decline, economic reset, and then government overthrow. It's interesting to look at it on paper, knowing what's happening, what will happen, what's in the process of happening, but the way it's happening, being directed by these darkest of energies, man, is a little disturbing to see. It's not human forces behind what you're seeing and witnessing on our globe right now. This is not a human response. This is something way different. And you can go off into dualities of dimensionality and vibration frequency, light versus dark. But what we're, I don't know. There is something very non-human driving this. I don't know how to. The jinn is the. Archons are not even known. They're not the ones either. It's something bigger and deeper than that.
Yeah, I would agree that even if it's not something supernatural or interdimensional, the people that are running it are no longer human at this point, or they wouldn't be pushing the kind of things that they're doing. I wanted to make a real small short point and talk about some stuff when we get back. So I sent you a CDC link that talks about the quarantine centers in each state. We'll put it that way, and I'll read out some of the stuff. But my point being, the real short one is that when you look through all of these different topics, and you see the reduction and everything, including people. You brought up a good point that all these pilots getting fired, cops getting fired, nurses getting fired, doctors getting fired. Think about that. These are all things that you wouldn't mind doing if you knew real soon there would be less demand for all kinds of services because there's less people. So less demand for food, less demand for doctors, less demand for everything. You could just go ahead and fire them all now because things are about to dramatically change into a new system. And you really don't want to keep all of those people from the old system in these organizations. And I pointed that out last time, that think about all the people in the government that are quitting because of a mandate, which only leaves one kind of person left in government or any of these organizations.
People that won't be there in 2 years to fill the posts. David Dubine right here, along with Ransom Godwin, 420 TV Freedomist Films. We're going to take a 2-minute break. We'll see you back. And I wanted to talk about
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Be evasive, but that doesn't mean that they're telling the truth as opposed to fiction.
And in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, and there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, indicating that there were giants before the Nephilim.
And sons of God, plural. They weren't talking about Jesus coming down.
No, that's right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm Steve Crawford, host of Factor Theory Live. Join me every Sunday night from 10 p.m. till midnight Eastern Standard Time on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Check it out.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Galactic Interstellar Council on Revolution Radio Studio A, Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Join us as we traverse the starseed paradigm, as expressed in the time-space continuum that we know as the divine expression of love and light. Integrating this conscious unity into the galactic paradigm. So welcome all, both terrestrial beings and galactic beings as one. So be it. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
If you think for 1 second that the Capitol will ever treat us fairly, you are lying to yourselves. Because we know who they are and what they do. This is what they do, and we must fight back. You can torture us and bomb us. Fire is catching. And if we burn, you burn with us. Good evening.
Are you awake yet? I hope. We've tried and we've tried for years and years to use passive resistance and loud voices to make a change. The time is over. Your governments around the world have no other goal than to decimate your entire existence at the hands of the bankers and the elites. The war is coming, and it's your choice to decide if you want to be a warrior or a victim. Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio. All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
And welcome back to the second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm David Dubine, creator of Adapt 2030. Right along here with Ransom Godwin, 420 TV, Freedomist Films. We had the break. We're back. I wanted to talk about the decline of food production matching what is looking like the decline of human population to match lockstep with what's going to be lost in the fields due to the grand solar minimum. But somebody in advance having that knowledge of how much population will need to decline so it won't become a problem to the rulers of our planet because Hungary will be on the streets. Now, if you consider this type of conversation and this information of something you want to listen to, consider supporting freedomslips.com right here, Revolution Radio Studio A. Because it looks every time, the next week, it's another pincer, it's another thing that YouTube's cutting off now, cook, clean, and catch channels. They're not even going to allow you to know how to catch fish and clean fish. That's how much they're trying to remove the food supply. And for those people who have never gotten into the realms of getting out into nature looking for food, you're going to have to start somewhere. Now YouTube's trying to limit that reach. So you already see where it's going. You absolutely see where everything is going. The censorship, the freedom of thought, and eventually one day, we all know what communications will be completely cut off. And then where does that leave you? Ham radios and communicating that way, signal transmission from one post to the next. Could take you a few minutes to get a message back. But one thing I'm noticing here with, I'm going to give a little timeline. I'm going to give a timeline here. If you're looking where the gas giants are sitting in the outer solar system, Jupiter is going to swing past our Earth 2022, right around June. And once it swings past the Earth, we're going to be locked in that second magnetic field all the way through 2024 when it squares up to this perfect square almost that was seen in 79 AD. Now, between 2022 and that squaring, the weather systems on our planet are going to go so far out of kilter. And that's only one thing to think about, but then the volcanic eruptions are going to be another. And there's going to be a lot of ash in the air that's going to cool temperatures and reduce agricultural output. That's the science behind it. A small second magnetic field in the outer solar system looping in on top of the one that's from the sun on the Earth at the same time, from 2022 well through 2025. And then right around 2026, that second magnetic field starts to loosen itself from the grip that it had on our planet from 2022. So those 4 years, you might want to call them whatever. There's labels for those things for a 7-year tribulation period. 4 of those years are going to be starting 2022. Like I said, that second magnetic looping toroid field on top of a toroid field, we're going to be in a middle line somewhere. So think of, if you had the science behind that wired through however many successive millennia of information flow, you would know as a government entity, body, world leader, governance system, whatever it is these days, it's morphing all the time of these same elite running the planet, that the cycle would repeat. And the present food production is at a certain level, let's call it level A at 100. And people eating is at 100. And there's even a little more. What if that food production was to drop to 80? Well, the population would need to match that. Because if people don't eat, that's when they get really uncontrollable and angry. And we've seen this through history 1,000 million times when people are angry on the street. Even just recently, let's go back into the Middle East. I mean, just what, not even a decade ago. And there was a revolution there. Color revolutions across all those countries. People were hungry. So what is it right now when they're trying to get a global depopulation event going on, but at the same time the yields in the fields across the entire planet are declining? For me, I'm looking at it as saying, all right, as a science-based thing sitting back, you're looking at a reduction of yields on X amount per either hectare or acre on bushels or however you're going to measure your weight. The equivalent decline needs to happen on the human side too. And I'm looking at it saying, no, how do they have this mapped out already? What algorithm are they running for a decline of 1-to-1? Because I'm looking at it saying, oh man, these elite, they're so terrified of people coming to the streets and getting together. They don't even want you to have conversations. We saw that same garbage down in Australia where like, you can't even talk to your neighbor. Can't even talk to your friend. Yeah, because they're terrified that you are going to come together with other people, and there's far more of us than them. And if people on this planet understood this relationship and this ratio and this algorithm running of crop declines in the fields needs to match the declines in human population so there's no government overthrows, if that were to come to light, the planet would be very different tomorrow, and the saying of no, I'm not going to obey to your mandates would drastically change in like a blink of an eye. People will be incredibly non-compliant and just throw the masks in and say, we're done. You're not going to depopulate the planet because you know the cycles and you didn't warn us. Now we're going to start to take our own steps for our own sovereignty and our own survival. Y'all are relegated to the dustbin of history. We don't need your centralized systems anymore. We're going to go off and do it on ourselves. And if you get in our way, we're going to tussle, baby. That's where we sit, Ransom. I'm going to cut my chatter there because I'm going to get myself in trouble. I know it.
No, I think we're at that point too. But I also think that the way that the elite are setting this up, are with various different programs to keep it kind of compartmentalized from people seeing the big picture. And what I mean by that is like, so I sent you this thing about the green zones from the CDC. So this is our actual CDC that printed all this stuff, and in there what it talks about is not what you would think, like a I'm going to say concentration camp. I know you're not supposed to say that, but they're concentrating people at a camp. Now, they're not taking sick people there. If you read through this is like, Aunt Esmeralda that's got COPD because she smoked too many cigarettes, or, all of these people that the CDC decides are at high risk, right? So what they're going to do is take these high risk individuals and they're going to temporarily relocate them to safe or green zones and establish households and neighborhoods there. Now, these are big groups of people that are scared to death that they're going to, contract or get something because of whatever life choices they made or were born with that gave them different health issues. But if you compare this to, I think it was 2012, I think it was in 2012. It was an updated version of the SARS executive order from George Bush, and it was updated by Obama to include anything that could be, kind of like an upper respiratory or respiratory problem. And that means anybody coughing or whatever. And it said in there that they could take their land and also quarantine those people. Now, we're getting to the point where they're actually setting up different places. And I sent you the article. It might be a couple articles up there from InfoWars that's talking about the different tweets about this. So it's basically state governments preparing for quarantine facilities for Americans unable to isolate themselves, or maybe people that don't want to isolate themselves because they don't feel like that they should be under house arrest or locked down in any kind of way, and they believe they might have the freedom to travel or to move unrestricted. Now you combine this with the upcoming what I'm going to call World War III. We could name it that. Other people argue and say World War III actually already happened. It was the Cold War, and this would be World War IV. But as you can see, Lockheed Martin just kind of got busted showing one of their aircraft there. And then what it looks to be like is a unidentified flying object, or a UAP. And this is probably what a lot of people are seeing. And this kind of goes along with that other idea that once this emergency wears out, that they'll have new reasons to lock down everybody all over the place. Now, I don't think that they are trying to like help society survive the next cycle. Actually, what I think is happening is kind of like a window shop that owns windows and hires some kids to go around and bust everybody's windows in town, guaranteeing them some work. So the elite are just kind of helping the population reduce further than it would have on its own, meaning that people like us all over the place would have, been forced, maybe not like us, but other people would have been forced into self-sufficiency. And there still is a lot of know-how out there. But if you can just slowly distract everyone and reduce the numbers until bam, all of a sudden nature throws us a curveball, then no one will be prepared. And all of those extra people that could have helped the population kind of maintain a good populace through the cycle and adapt to it are going to be gone. So it seems like the elite are trying to control this into a bottleneck, kind of where only certain people are alive once real food shortages start due to the environment throwing us a curveball. But when you look at some of these technologies and then you combine these ideas, like they're going to be flying these things around enforcing these lockdowns. They've already tried it and kind of got the public used to these drones, and they can go one of two ways. This can be the ultra high tech one world government that keeps everybody safe, or if people aren't buying it and cooperating, they can just go ahead and pull out the alien invasion idea, or as a lot of people are going to be talking about in Vegas for the 14th International Conference on Climate Change, is that every government in the world has planned on making these kind of lockdowns in association with carbon output or CO2 production of human beings, meaning they want to control every bit of that. And the way that they want to reduce this number kind of coalesces with the depopulation idea. I know that was a mouthful, but I wanted to know, you were talking about those plastic containers. There have been many different plans that are like evil in nature that you can find out that have been declassified. So it's not really any stretch of the imagination to think that the governments of the world are planning things similar to things that they've done in the past. They didn't do all of them, but let's be honest here. Governments of the world have killed hundreds of millions of people, if not billions of people. It's the #1 killer of humankind, democide. And we're in a predicament where there are these people that think that their right to rule or their opinions outweigh the necessity and the freedoms of every individual on the planet. So we're at that point, and it seems like they're just kind of giving the population a nudge into depopulation, just in time for the apex of the environment changing on everyone. And then they can be in a position where they're the only saviors, just like the only window shop in town. When some thugs vandalized half the town and broke lots of glass, one guy is going to, make out way better than everyone else because they're the only one with the answer.
Get out of the cities. That's where this play will happen first. Now, I can't see a multi-pincher approach on this where they're going to target the countryside and the cities at the exact same time. Maybe it's on the books, maybe it's not, but I just don't see it. Yeah, you mentioned a little snippet in there about who would be left after this reset. I'll think about it from a global governance standpoint. You're going to want people who are resilient, self-sufficient, they can grow their own, take care of their own, have their own systems of law and order and protection within a community, that they've not bought into the narratives. They've gotten out of harm's way. They've set up their own communities, and perhaps in a twisted way, that's who you would want to come in or move through to the next world to repopulate. And then again, we get into this whole thing about would they be chipped, tracked, and the slave class after this reset? Do you get a small reprieve of, okay, they're driving out anybody who can get out of harm's way, out of harm's way. If you didn't get the warning, it's kind of like we look through wars through history. There's always some precursors. Maybe there's a few shells that land on the outside of the city, and you're like, no, that's just on the left side. That's on the east side of town. It'll never come here. Our armies will take care of it. Because it brings me back to I keep coming back to this book, and I don't know why it's so stuck in my mind, the account of the Bosnian War, that 7 years in hell. That is the most telling story of somebody who lived through the gaslighting and the real ramifications of shortages and how the society adjusted and what was left at the edge of the ashes coming out of that. Because right up to the very last minute, there was, oh, no, the peace accords will be signed. They'll be signed. Don't worry. The government, believe us, peace accords will be signed. And then 12 hours later, they were in a blockade. We see this routinely. Again, the UK, just even a couple of days back, the Ministry of Transportation would say, no, don't worry, the no fuel shortages. Absolutely. Continue with your daily lives. Don't buy extra, everything. And the day later, they're out there needing the military to deliver fuel transport trucks because they ran out of fuel in 90% of the stations across the country. I mean, I see these direct comparisons to the warning signs around. You got to get out of the cities. You got to get out of the cities. Those are the first places targeted for the agenda to move forward. Maybe that's it. Maybe they want people to flee the cities. Whoever's stuck there, you didn't get the message. Oh, I don't know the financial means. Well, I understand some people are in that predicament, but If it comes down to you dying in a city or getting out to be creative enough, I don't know. Do you think you could get creative so you don't die in a city? And these people taking all these boosters and jabs and things, that's a fast way to end your life. I mean, how many? And I saw that report coming out too from Medicare itself showing the number of recipients that had direct death or injury from getting those supposedly, I'm not even going to use the V word because it's not. It's mRNA experimental gene therapy put into their bodies, some by non-consent, and the death tolls is 50,000, and that's not a problem in our country? I guess not. Now, there's these signs everywhere. People coming out with numbers off the VAERS database saying, hey, this thing's in extreme danger. Now you got the whole Medicare database that's been open for everybody to see. And there's really not a pushback in our society of this. Forget the things of completely damaging the body where you can never work or even have a normal life ever again. Those are in the millions. But the death within 2 weeks is in the millions too. So at what point do people say, wait, whoa, 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 seriously, whoa, enough is enough. And you're going to continue to comply and say, yeah, I'll get that so I can go to work and get $1 that's going to be worth nothing after hyperinflation runs its course. And you look at all these signs across the society, signs in the skies. We got the electrified skies, the largest jets ever to come off the top of thunderstorms that held state for like 9 seconds in the afterglow, and they moved across the skies, things off the Chaco Canyon walls coming to life in the skies for 9 seconds, but no, an electrified ionosphere that's discharging from planets. No, that's normal stuff. There are signs in the skies. There's signs on all the other planets. And when you're looking on our own little tiny blue marble here, there's an enormous amount of things that, wait a second. The changes are vast. The changes are a threat to the elite. So they're going to get rid of you first before you try to get rid of them. And they're just hoping that this whole cat and mouse game ends up on their side, that they can get rid of everybody here fast enough so you can't figure it out before you're looking for their heads on a platter. That's metaphorically speaking, as in like the French Revolution type of things. Historical facts, historical, quims there.
I was just thinking about when you were talking about how they may actually want people to flee the cities, or at least a certain kind of people. I just went into this big, long thought, kind of based on what I was talking about the Joel Skousen theory about a limited nuclear exchange with China. What if, you knew that was going to happen and you knew which city it was? You could pick a city that's dead, pretty much, as far as industry. You could pick a city that has a lot of rich people that still own stuff that may not be around, and then you could have a giant theft of resources. But also imagine all of the buildings and things that were, insured for weird purposes. So you would think you could see that coming. I kind of thought about that. Think about, certain kind of people would leave the cities, the people with wealth that could go start things. And I kind of agree with you. It seems like, when you're talking about eugenicists and things like that, they kind of would be twisted in the way that they would, want to reduce the population down to a certain kind of people that were smart enough to overcome, survival of the fittest, that figured out the change and could adapt to the earth. And it really made me think of the time machine when he went into the future. If you remember, whatever the reason, they had a reason in the thing, but you can imagine us, whatever the reason, where the grid goes down, there's still going to be two types of people on the earth, no matter how much it's reduced. There's going to be, just like in the time machine, the Eloi, that are up on the earth and they're still living on the earth and they're farming. And even some of them have developed higher abilities like telepathy. That was in the book. And then you got this other race that's also still alive, but they're underground. They're the people with the technology, and they're cannibals. They eat the substance of the people on the surface. But not only that, they have a weird communist hierarchy where there's only some of them that are allowed to be smart and know things. And you know, they kind of show that in that whole movie that they did of that. It's in the book too. And that's kind of almost where you could see our future going in the not too distant future. A very smart, um, uh, genetically diverse group of human beings that survived a cataclysm versus these weirdly picked genes of the elite that got bottlenecked down in their bunkers. So you know, you can kind of see this actually coming out to be right now. Two civilizations, one an agrarian civilization of people that are you know, willing to have a connection to the earth, live off the earth, and have higher thought, and then another group that's about enslavement, destruction, and exploitation of resources. I mean, are we not literally on the cusp of that reality right now?
Or have we been for millions of years, and there's another rodeo happening? Because you're looking at electrons, positrons. You know, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Different energetic particles swinging through cosmic ray densities, way off the charts of anything measurable now. Literally, it would blow the charts off and it would shatter all of the equipment. I mean, literally, so far millions of times above what we would consider a cosmic ray outburst that would be measurable. That would still be, if you were deep enough underground with different particle densities, shielded, that structure would continue to remain underground. On the surface, that would be a completely different thing, though. The human awakening, we don't know what would happen at that kind of energetic burst that comes through for all the species that are on the surface, but we have seen it in the fossil record. There's sudden jumps, evolutionary leaps, as Robert Felix used to call it. But that movie that you referenced there is quite interesting. And, you know, if you go back to the concept, I forget who the author was. There's a book called Us and Them. And the them is the Neanderthals or some sort of Australopithecus that would hunt the humans. That was a nocturnal species, giant eyes, reminiscent of Sasquatch today. But it was a nocturnal hunter and used to hunt humans. So there was this that's where all these stories had originated from, fearing the dark, things going bump in the night, etc. So humans would hide in the trees and, you know, fortify themselves and lock the doors and board up the forts at night because those larger predators on bipedal predators would also be out there at the same time in the evening. That's why nobody ever went out in hunting parties, less than like 5, 8, 10 people at a time, always men. Nobody ever traveled through the forest by themselves. You never came back out. Like things we take for granted, like going on a solo hike. Hey, I'm just going to go chill out. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to sit on a rock by myself for a few hours. You'd have been gone back then. So there's a lot of these things about different species existing on the planet, even surface on surface, us and them. And then, you know, how many stories are there of hollow earth? And if there were a outburst of different energetic particles, a lot of those would be blocked by the rock layering. And it depends how deep you were under the earth in caves. I mean, how many stories of when the sun micronovas, do people run to caves and escape the plasma discharge and all that chaos on the surface just being in a cave that's not very deep in consideration to how deep the crust is? You know, they're in the top few hundred feet, maybe top 1,000 feet. But these inner earth things, they're talking about going down 30, 40 miles. Think about the different energetic particles that would never, ever make it down 30 miles into the crust. So is there an awakening factor with this density of energetic particles that comes through on a heartbeat wave from the center of our galaxy that shoots off these ray bursts, for a better term, every cyclical pattern, 12,000 years approximately? This system you're talking about underground, if they were deep enough underground, they wouldn't be as affected with this awakening or spiritual upgrade that wafts across the spiral arm of the galaxy every, like I say, 12,000 years or so. Could they maintain a communist system 30 miles down in the crust compared to what the Enlightenment would be on the surface. Can you imagine if those people 30 miles under the crust after 2 million years of being enslaved into a communist system, 2 million years after that came to the top up here after a cosmic ray burst where everybody was into this sort of golden age? That would be a movie. That would be a movie in itself. A continuation of the time machine where the inner Earth people meet the upper Earth people after a cosmic ray burst, bringing in the Enlightenment.
I think that's kind of what they hinted at that V movie, where the reptilians just show up with free vaccines and other stuff for everybody when they take over. Where did they actually come from? I was wondering when you were talking about that. You were talking about how deep would you have to be kind of to be protected if something major happened. And it makes you wonder if these facilities that they put all around the world where they claim they're trying to detect these exotic particles are not really sensors to see, how deep they have to go to be protected if a real large CME came towards the earth. And, there's a couple of movies. There's one with Nick Cage in it, and I forgot the name of the movie, but in that movie there's a CME that's going to come to Earth, and he's some kind of scientist studying the sun.
Knowing. That's a movie you need to watch. Anybody, it's called Knowing.
Yeah, that's right. And
you need to watch that movie. It is so succinct of what would happen and people who know and how they wouldn't tell the populace. That's a great movie to watch. Not the best acting, not the best storyline, but it's pure truth.
Well, they got a couple unique things in there. You were just talking about how, there's a next level of people during one of these times. And, there's these weird angel alien things that come and get these certain kids that get the message. But what I thought was unique in that movie is when he calls his parents, they're talking about, well, we'll just hide in the basement. And he's like, no, you're not getting it. This is going to penetrate so far in the earth, everything on the surface is going to get fried, and it's weird because in that movie they were talking about it. They didn't tell anybody to the very last minute when it was too late to care. But they had this weird concept in the movie about all of these children being born that were slightly different than everybody else, and they were good enough that the aliens, angels, whatever you want to call it, picked them up and took them to a new planet to start a new population. So that is real sci-fi. But when you reduce down the elements to that, are they not talking about some kind of cataclysm where human beings are not just reborn and repopulate, but are seeded on purpose in a certain way? And maybe that's what these elite think that they're really doing. I've always had this weird thought. Maybe these elite really do have meetings and they're sitting around, well, what is the real greater good? Maybe, like there's something we're not allowed to know because it's really would destroy us. We always think the sinister way, but it could be the opposite direction. I doubt it, but it could be where they're really saying, we can't let humans do this, or, we'll get blown off the face of the earth by this other civilization that has warned us repeatedly that we can't do something like maybe reach space. And that might be why we have stories of the Tower of Babel, and we're reaching that point now where we're in low Earth orbit and we're trying to reach and expand out into the solar system. And it's odd that we happen to be doing that right at the time when the cycle is changing. It must be because they know something that they are not sharing. And maybe that's expansion into space may have a window or a bubble of circumstances that they could actually get out there and once and for all, like kind of take control of our planet and everything every single human being does on it. We're the beta right now.
Yeah, I think in the movie it was 5 miles under. He's like, no, you don't get it. You have to be 5 miles under the crust. One of those kind of things, right? But that goes right in with the sun. And if you were going to escape the Van Allen radiation belt, you would want to do it at the lowest solar activity possible, because the magnetic field generates that Van Allen radiation belt. So the lower our magnetic field goes, the easier it would be to transverse that death zone above our heads. Now with the electrogravitics, you could have something that would be, 50 feet thick of lead. It wouldn't even matter because it's weightless. And that's very possible. You know, Germany was experimenting on that back in the 40s, but this version we're led to believe in the 1960s when they put up a tiny little rocket with a couple inches thick of aluminum or some kind of composite that allowed them to get up there in 3 days, but we haven't been back, and it just makes no sense. Why not? The lead shielding on a propulsion engine is not feasible. But if you wanted to escape what we do now, see, we're given two different stories here because there's two different possibilities distinctly what's happening at this very second. Well, the technology that exists right now, electrogravitics, you could go so far off Earth, but then you would reach that point where your machinery would no longer work because the electromagnetic field of the Earth can't generate the power for those machines to continue using those oppositional rotational disks on north-south magnets spinning against each other, because you can only go so far off the Earth before that magnetic field dissipates enough where you don't get any return out of the magnetic field. Now, you can get up pretty high. I don't know about getting to the moon and back with what is considered electrogravitics craft, but flying through the atmosphere at like Mach 17 or Mach 18, not even a problem. But if you really wanted to escape, no, seriously, Ransom, if you really wanted to escape, you would go for the lowest solar activity or even a magnetic pole reversal where there would be no magnetic field, which means there would be zero radiation belt around the planet. Zero. None. No Van Allen belt. And see, this is another thing. If it came down to a real geomagnetic pole reversal and there was no magnetic field for some time, things would go haywire. Would the planet reverse its rotation? Possibly, not sure. But what would happen with the radiation belts when the magnetic field strength reestablish itself? Would those Van Allen radiation belts, would it add a new 2 layers? Not really sure. But the only way to get out of there is exactly at a 0 point. Now, who's measuring all this that wants to get off Earth, that's getting into this grand solar minimum, knowing the cycle's at the end? We're coming into a possible ice age onset with the primer fields collapsing in the sun, at the same time going into, what if it goes to a magnetic pole reversal? At that few seconds, they would have to be waiting, like you say, inner orbit, waiting to jettison out during those few seconds or minutes while that happens. Not outside this realm of possibility. There's a lot of records they've stolen for the last few thousand years marauding around the planet. Somebody knows the cycle. You're right. They're trying to get off planet. You get a few second window every 8,000 years.
Yeah, no, I was kind of wondering about this, what you thought about it. I sent you a series of pictures.
Yeah, I'm taking a look at those.
And I got 2 questions for you. You know, all this time we've been going to space, allegedly, and we've always needed these supposedly big, bulky suits to hold the pressurized, you know, and people have questioned how they move their hands around and done, you know, dexterity tasks with these big gloves with the pressure on it, and they've kind of shown that you can't do that, and they were called conspiracy theorists. But my question is when did we jump from this big bulky suit that needed all of this stuff for a person to live in over to the SpaceX suit that looks like something that you bought at a costume store, or it's a motorcycle motorcycle outfit, right? And there's nothing on it. There's no air tubes, nothing. There's no electronics. There's nothing special about it. It looks like basically like that COVID helmet that they were trying to sell, right? It looks like the same thing. And then another question, you know, if we did pop off some nukes when the magnetic field was collapsed as far as it could, when it went back out, it would most likely push most of that radioactive material out into that band as well. You know, shortening the shelf life kind of the destruction. But that idea that you just said right there, it's very possible that it hasn't been technologically possible for a biological entity to leave the planet until just the right circumstances, like you were saying, where maybe the magnetic field collapsed, you know, and maybe the magnetic field of the planets is helping with, you know, the radiation or whatever, or leaving, or there's a certain speed that you could attain if you just happen to have 4 gas giants in the right, you know, locale. You could whip around those, gaining unimaginable speed. And then you look at these engines, and we've talked about magnetic motors and stuff. It's considered disruptive technology. People have got their lives ruined and trouble. And then all of a sudden, Bill Gates, his startup, they're making one, and they're saying, don't worry about it. Fusion's just around the corner. And then, like I said, they're leaking these next level aircraft, because I don't think it's an accident they put this aircraft on a flatbed and allowed someone to film it. And what it shows is, like I said, it could be confused with alien technology, at least in the past 20 years. And then you got to wonder, how long has that thing actually been flying, or something similar to it. And now we're approaching this point where all of a sudden we just need this costume and no real gizmos to fly in space.
You could carry everything you need and pressurized. It wouldn't even matter, if you're talking about weightless craft, there's no limit. There's literally no limit on it. It's a weightless craft. That's what people can't get past is the shielding will have to be 20 feet thick and that would weigh 16 or like 160 tons. There's no way we could even get enough vertical thrust to get that off the ground. Doesn't matter. It weighs nothing. It's weightless, dude.
Right.
Okay.
Well, what another good point you're making is those suits actually look like something you would be wearing if you were in a craft that had no inertia properties. So, like you said, you wouldn't get thrown against the wall and turned into mush at 8 or 20 G's or whatever it takes to make those kind of maneuvers that we've seen in videos and different things. But if you didn't need, all of these things to worry about, you could pretty much sit in there in your Sunday clothes in a craft that didn't have inertia, because the gravity wouldn't be affecting it, and you could just zip anywhere you wanted to be. And I think it's possible they've had this technology, but for one reason or another, maybe it is the conditions of the magnetic fields with the sun and the planets that wouldn't allow them to actually get past where we're at. Or maybe, a lot of people forget that we're not the only moving system out there in the cosmos, and all through the Milky Way, there's other solar systems, moving, the whole thing's moving. There's all kinds of objects we can't see out there. We're basically little blind moles on a planet, and it looks like we're about to be reduced in number just as a pest, so that the next level of technology that they're going to use isn't going to be shared with the masses of people like they think it will be.
Well, looking in one direction where, this whole synopsis is the Van Allen radiation belts are keeping certain people on planet so they cannot escape out too. But perhaps it's a fence from those coming in as well. Because you look about how many myths and legends talk about something invisible holding off the enemy out in space. So I'm looking at it as almost like a two-way fence here. These entities, maybe they came in the last time and they jumped through from outside in space onto the planet's surface during one of these geomagnetic pole reversals. They realized, oops, we can't get back out. Finally, they got the technology to get back out, but what's going to replace them on the jump back in? Because there's always going to be some intelligent creature that will be out there saying, hey, I want to know what's going on. What if we can take over the planet? That Van Allen radiation belt is there for a reason. Is it just our species that can't transverse it? Because almost everything that's on this planet can't get out. It'll be killed with the radiation. But what about other things? Like you said, how many other galaxies and other planets in our own galaxy would be accustomed to that radiation where they could walk through it as easily as we can walk through the air and walk through a door? I don't know, we're getting into the deep realms of myth and legend, but for whatever happened, the inbreeding of some of these more ancient species, if we go back, well back beyond Noah and the book of Enoch, well back beyond that, well back into the six-fingered entities across this planet. radiation that keeps them in here that they cannot escape is quite something different from another species on a different star system with different gravitational fields and radiation that could maybe easily penetrate here, but maybe that was their own locking themselves in the prison, was taking human wives and having children and interbreeding and intermarrying with the women of Earth. So how far do you have to go back to the six-fingered, the six-toed giants that took Earth women as their wives? And those children, and then the children of them were finally the Nephilim. And you got to go back a couple generational species, and if you're looking at each of those jumps being thousands of years of time, right now the human, we only live for 1,000 years, like Methuselah in the Bible, 1,000-year-old average lifespan, Methuselah, but we're talking 2 different iterations past that where supposedly 10,000-year lifespans were normal. So their own undoing was having their children breeding with the women of men. It's you go right back into Genesis when they're talking about this. So they're 2 whole leaps off going back into the species line there. Maybe that's what locked them on the planet, was our own DNA as a human that interbred with the Nephilim. They're looking for a way out. This is it.
That's interesting you bring that up. Right here in New Mexico where I live, there's been articles all over the internet. The oldest footprints in North America were just found out here at 23,000 years old at White Sands, New Mexico, about, I'd say 10 miles from where I live. But also on the other end, on the same 33rd degree parallel that we live in, there's a place called Three Rivers. And at Three Rivers is a petroglyph site, and there are depictions of, polydactyl people, four fingers, 6 fingers. So I would say that it's not too long in the past that some people like that still were on the earth, even in North America. And you think about this, those stories of these giants, red-headed people. There have been skulls found. Matter of fact, in the University of Arizona, I believe, they still have some skulls there that are quite large, 2 rows of teeth. That's not a myth. Actually, it's on a episode of Ancient Aliens. They actually show the skulls. But this is intriguing because, there's always been this story of the Bering Land Bridge about how people came into Americas. And we're finding out people have been here for 20, 30, possibly 1,000 years, which puts some of these sites in South America, Central America, the possibility of them being much older than they say they are. And then you add in the evidence of polydactyl people living in North America all over the place. It's on the petroglyphs, and they're trying to say that the petroglyphs are only depicting, like 900, 1,000 years ago, possibly back 3,000 years ago. But when you see footprints of a human being chasing a giant ground sloth, and they're not afraid of it, you could tell by the footprints. So they chase this animal down. There was a family unit, a mother, a children. So people were living out their lives right here where I'm living, not too different than I'm living today, 23,000 years ago at least, which means that they probably weren't new to the area. And then you look at these depictions of these weird robots, cyclopses, phoenixes, doorways, and then you got the Parad instabilities all on the rock. So there have been people right here where I live for almost 25,000 years confirmed right here, seeing these weird things and coming in contact with different kinds of people. And then if you add into that the oldest DNA in North America actually is a Polynesian DNA, proves that people were coming in from the bottom in South America and making their way up on boats. I know that's shocking. But if you consider that people were getting on boats and going to Australia 40,000 to 50,000 years ago, and they're writing down and they're depicting some of the same things that you see here in the Southwest, I think we're about to get to that point where we see these things, and it's possibility some of these other humans, if I don't want to get too crazy, may even make an appearance at this new cycle, because things are changing. As in history, they're depicted, they're talked about, they're in our myths and legends, they're in our historical documents, if you consider some of the religious text as historical. So we might actually get to see some of this, and there may be people that have been hiding since the end of the last ice age. And maybe they wouldn't even do good or be, able to utilize the planet until it's similar to the way it was at different times.
Comes back to the frequency state. And I had a question. So they were chasing a giant sloth. So I'm wondering if there's a YouTube video on how to butcher that after you take it down. Because imagine that. What's the kind of transfer of information from one generation to another? Just hunting that specific species that's extinct now. But would it have been that big where you said, okay, we're only going to take the tastiest of loins out of that, and that's it. We're going to let the rest of it rot? I don't think so. I think the populations were much larger at that point, much more organized than were given credit to the people of the time. That one of those sloths could have fed a village for an entire year or even just a week. Who knows how large they were. Storage techniques, you see the bone cuts on the bone. So obviously the information was passed down on how to take that meat off the bone. Because I noticed that myself when I was trying to remove different bones out of this lamb in the hindquarter. You had to separate, but then you had to cut the meat off the bone itself. And I noticed after we cleaned one of the bones and put it into soup that somebody was shooting at coyote over there, that there were striation marks on the bone. And I said, oh, I've seen that in history, how they had noticed somebody intelligent had cut the meat off the bone using a tool or an implement at that point. So let's pass down knowledge. Like, how many generations before that was the first time they'd ever taken one of those animals and we don't know what it even looks like inside. Okay. And then the next person that did it, the next generation, and it became a science of, taking the meat off the bone like it is now. But this holding the state of vibration, maybe some of these entities can't come in until the vibration state is higher. Because we've gone through a really dark phase here in this iron age of destruction and top-down governance. The vibration's becoming lighter. So perhaps these entities that help humanity need to exist in a higher vibration light frequency. And they actually don't reappear until the vibrational state of humanity is at a higher level, along with this whatever regional sector of our galaxy is as well. Makes sense. We wouldn't see them because we can't physically see them until we're in the same vibrational frequency as their range would be. Demonically, yeah, we can see the church doing its stuff through the last 500-700 years, going back to the conquest into, I started the show talking about the Rosicrucians and that sort of thing back. How far back do we need to go when the church had so much power? And that was the vibration frequency of the planet, was the demagogue church holding state on everything. Well, that's long gone. We know the destruction that had been had through that. But now the vibration frequency is higher. So maybe the entities couldn't even exist in that low vibration state. Or maybe they've been here and nobody could see them in the Iron Age, because it was vibrating so slowly and so low of a frequency wave that they could be standing in front of you, but you wouldn't be able to see them. But now the frequency is changing, so perhaps they will just suddenly appear one day because our frequency just jumped up one day, but suddenly we're in the same range, visually, audibly.
You still there?
I am, yeah.
Oh, that's weird. You cut off right when you said audibly, and I was like, was that it? The frequency changed? No.
The frequency changed. What's the frequency,
Yeah,
Ken?
so what do you think these people were doing back then? I mean, kind of in this article that's about the footprints, they I read the scientific paper written about it, and it talks about a mother and a toddler, and she carried it sometimes, and she let it walk, and it was running around and playing. So you could tell that even though this time period was supposed to be really tumultuous for humankind, they were just out there doing their thing, surviving. This was at the end of the ice age when everything was dying off, dire wolves, all of that stuff, cave bear, sloth, all this stuff was dying off, but humans kept on rocking it right through. So obviously, even if things change in this grand solar minimum to a really big degree where it's hard to live, I have confidence that on the surface, even people will be doing their thing, even if people are hiding in the bunkers. And when they come out, they will be alien, to everyone else. They won't know how to do things, and they will have a need, a necessity for the people that have adapted and lived through the trials and tribulations, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it does make you wonder what was the state of the world coming out of the ice age. So I've referenced this a few times before. Once the depth of the ice age had been reached, climate patterns would have stabilized for 30,000 years. You would know exactly down pretty much the day of when to harvest and when to plant. Now, regionally where you are and how far you were off the equator, obviously the weather's different. You go closer to the North Pole now, it gets colder. Canada's colder than Florida. It would be the same thing during a full-blown ice age. It would have been warmer in Cuba. It would have been warmer down in Costa Rica compared to Central California or Colorado. But the weather patterns and climatic patterns would have stabilized for sure, way more than they have now, because we're in this interglacial period. We're in the flux period of all the last 100,000 years, coming out of that ice age. A lot of cooling events, the Younger Dryas, up and down, up and down, up and down, and then getting locked into the ice is the most stable period of time. Right now, where everybody thinks, oh, this is the stable climate. No, it's not. This is the least stable of the period of a full ice age. Coming in and out is this period. Entry into, exit out of. So where we sit right now, it's the most tumultuous time in 100,000 years for climatic conditions. The most perfect time would be locked into the full ice age at the very bottom of the cooling, so you know exactly where you sit for the last 10, 20, 30,000 years of climatic patterns. It wouldn't have changed in one iota for 30,000 years. We are in a dangerous position right now going into the cooling, changes in the grand solar minimum, heading at the very, 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 very cusp edge of. However, this is the longest interglacial that has been recorded in the last, 12, 14 ice age entries and exits. Interesting times. May your days be interesting. David Devine signing off with Ransom Godwin. Hey, we'll see you next week. Good job, no pay. Say bye.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.